It's Bowser, right? It's probably Bowser. Recently, I ranked all the tracks in Mario Kart World, and when putting Starview Peak towards the bottom of the list, which is a track that is heavily inspired by Rosalina's Comet Observatory, by the way, it had me going, wow, Rosalina's really been handed the short end of the stick when it comes to Mario Kart tracks. Because Rosalina's Ice World from 7, while much better than Starview Peak, still was sort of middling too. It made me realize I never really thought about the tracks in terms of characters before, despite a huge chunk of them being attributed to specific racers. I mean, it's not called Pinball Circuit, it's called Waluigi Pinball. So, which character has had the best tracks then? How do we even determine that? Here's how this is gonna work. I've compiled every single track attributed to a character, organized them by character, and we're gonna go through each track one by one, give it a score out of 5, then get that character's overall average. Twice is a coincidence and 3 is an actual pattern, so we'll be working on rule of thirds here. To be considered, the character must have been a racer in at least 3 games and have at least 3 tracks to their name. Otherwise, I could just be like, you know who has the best tracks? Captain Falcon. The guy with only 2 tracks and not even playable. Unfortunately, this does disqualify Dry Bones, Waluigi, and the aforementioned Rosalina, so let's briefly talk about those real quick. Waluigi has 2 tracks, Stadium and Pinball. I'm going to try to ignore remakes and just consider how everyone's tracks were when they were first initially introduced. That being the case, I'd give Stadium a 2 and Pinball a 3. Stadium was almost immediately better in the very next game, the second they added the trick system, and I have an old-ass review of DS on my channel where I've already gone over my thoughts on Waluigi Pinball, so watch that if you want to know why it's a 3. Dry Bones and Rosalina also have 2 tracks, although it's a bit more debatable for them. For Dry Bones, there's Bone Dry Dunes from 8 and Dry Bones Burnout from World. A 2 and a 5 respectively, by the way, if I am scoring them. But Bone Dry Dunes technically doesn't include his name, which is why it's more debatable whether or not it's a Dry Bones course. Rosalina has Ice World and Starview Peak, a 3 out of 5 and a 1. Starview Peak likewise doesn't title the titular character, although I think most people agree that it is a Rosalina track since it has the observatory, and you even unlock Rosalina for doing the cup that includes this track. With that out of the way, time for the characters that actually made the cut. Starting with the Big M himself. If I were to ask you which character do you think has the most tracks, I'm certain most of you would assume Mario, right? He has 12 to his name, but believe it or not, there is one character with 15. 12 is a lot though. Unfortunately for Mario, he's really never had any standouts. 4 on Super Nintendo, Mario Circuits 1 through 4, and I just want to say right now that I did cut these guys some slack for the Super Nintendo tracks. Think of it as grading on a curve because it's not fair to just completely plummet someone's overall score because they were unfortunate enough to have a SNES track. Mario Circuit 1 I gave a 2, Circuit 2 I gave a 4. This is actually one of the best maps in the game, I think. Again, trying not to skew my opinions with remakes, but I really liked it in Mario Kart 7 as well. The only track on Super Nintendo where you jump an earlier segment, which is neat. Then Circuits 3 and 4 I both gave a 3 out of 5. They're both kind of the same thing. And Circuit 3 has been brought back so many times, I think you've all played it and would likely agree it's sort of just an average track. Mario Raceway from N64. Decent layout, although maybe a little too unremarkable for a Flower Cup track. I scored this one a 3. Mario Circuit GBA I think is best known for its remake in 8. I actually really like that version to be completely fair. The anti-grav segment is neat and I like the secret glider ramp. The original version is a 2 though, if I'm being honest. Circuit on GameCube, again a very average track. Starting to notice a pattern, I'm sure. 3 star. There's some decent turns and a chain jump keeping it out of a 2. DS's Mario Circuit, same kind of deal. Piranha plants shooting fireballs make for a fun hazard. Really like this one in the booster course pass actually. 3 star for the OG. Wii version of Mario Circuit sucks. It's literally just a figure 8. Any track that is comparable to figure 8 circuit is deserving of a 1 star, although I'm cutting it a bit of slack for the chain chomp and the mushroom ramp. So 2 out of 5. 3DS is probably my favorite of all the Mario circuits. It just has more going on. You drive for the castle, there's a glider segment, a decent track. Maybe I'm being overly generous because his other tracks are so aggressively average, but I think I'll even give this one a 4. Mario Kart Stadium is the opener of 8 and it's fine. As an introductory track, it does its job teaching you what this game is all about by having an anti-grav U-turn. A 3 star. Lastly, there's Mario Kart 8's Mario Circuit, and it's another figure 8. Sorry, but even anti-grav can't save this from being a 1 star. There's all the rankings for Mario, so how did he do? Well, averaging everything out puts him at a 2.75 out of 5. And unfortunately for Mario, in slight spoilers I guess, but it won't get any lower than this. Yes, indeed, on average, Mario Mario has the worst tracks in his own series. I want to briefly mention Mario Bros Circuit from World. It's actually one of the better openers, but it's called Mario Bros Circuit. I didn't know whether I should attribute it to both Mario and Luigi are not included at all, although to avoid repeats, I decided to not include it at all. Which brings us to Luigi, who's had 5 tracks of his own. Definitely a lot less than his brother, but unlike his brother, it's been more quality over quantity. Ironically, his worst track was his first, Luigi Raceway from Nintendo 64. As a starter track, it's whatever. The hot air balloon dropping off an item is cute, and the Jumbotron is fun. Not much else here though. 2-star. GBA Luigi Circuit is probably the best you could do for a circuit track on the Game Boy. The puddles that spin you out make for a more interesting layout, and it's one of the rare tracks that takes place during a rainstorm. I wouldn't give it any higher than a 3, but a 3 is pretty good for a Game Boy circuit track. Luigi Circuit from GameCube might be the best starter track in any Mario Kart game to date. Driving against racers coming from the other way isn't something we wouldn't see again until nearly 2 decades later with the Booster Course Pass, and it's a fun gimmick. And it also gives you a lot of space to familiarize yourself with Double Dash's controls and fun new items. This is a 4. Luigi's Mansion is easily one of the most iconic tracks from DS. I wish more of the track took place in the mansion, but especially for a Mushroom Cup track, there's a lot going on here. Mud pits, moving trees, sharp turns, another easy 4. Lastly, there's Luigi Circuit from Wii. Not quite as strong as GameCube's offering, but this is still a decent opening track of boost panels, a mushroom ramp, and some soft but decent turns. Maybe I'm being a little too generous with the 3, but especially given this is the first track of the game, it's at least a stronger offering than Mario's Circuit in Wii. Overall, this gives us an average of 3.2 out of 5. Still a little low, but he definitely did better than his brother. Both Luigi and Mario are unfortunately Nintendo's go-to for attaching a run-of-the-mill circuit track onto. That being said, Luigi's have been better, and having a more unique track in the flavor of Luigi's Mansion also helps his resume. The princess, who has had 5 tracks of her own, has also unfortunately been the guinea pig when it comes to being the representation for the game's basic circuit maps. Luckily for Peach, a lot of her tracks appear later in each respective game, allowing her to generally have more complicated tracks than the brothers. This can be seen as early as her first track, Royal Raceway, a track that doesn't reference her by name, but I think that most people are in agreement that this is a Peach track. They have iconography of her crown that can be seen above the bleachers, her castle is represented, I don't know, the sky is pink, and also out of the original roster of 8, only one of those characters were canonically royalty, and this track is called Royal Raceway after all. Tight turns, sick-ass jump, this is a 4 out of 5. The one and only time Princess was unfortunately attached to a starter track was in Super Circuit, and it's debatably her weakest track. What do I even say, it's the first track of a Game Boy game. 2 out of 5. I feel like I might be gassing this one up since I never really thought much of Peach Beach from Double Dash, but when I broke down what made the original version work when scripting my Mario Kart World ranking, it kinda made me realize, you know what, yeah, this is actually a pretty solid Mushroom Cup track. Moving obstacles, dynamic layouts in regards to the rising tide, I'm finally giving this track its dues, which equates to a 3. Peach Gardens is a pretty unexpected Special Cup track, but appearing that late in DS allows for a mere garden track to have a bit of depth to it. Tons of branching paths, chain chomps roaming around, one of my favorites from DS actually. Plus, taking place in the gardens in front of the castle makes it feel like more than just an unrelated track with a random character name attached to it. Her final track is Stadium for Mario Kart World. It's an alright circuit track. Obviously, I already said all this in my world ranking video, but given this is the track that precedes the finale that is Rainbow Road, I wish there was a bit more going on here. There aren't even any obstacles in this track. The track icon has a picture of a chain chomp, but don't be fooled. There are no chain chomps to speak of. Still, I'd give this a 3. Altogether, Peach is sitting at a 3.2 out of 5. Same as Luigi. Remember that one time Nintendo made that Yoshi story game and they had that one song I was like, Yoshi. Yoshi. That was weird. Yoshi is another racer of 5 tracks, and his very first was Valley from 64, notable for being the only track in the entire series that obscures everyone's placement until crossing the finish line. The rumor goes that the Nintendo 64 had such a poopy, stinky CPU that it couldn't actually calculate who was in first because of all the multiple routes. A rumor still endorsed by many players and wikis to this day. But I mean, I don't know, if you set the HUD elements to that one thing where it displays everyone's position in like a box, it seems to keep track of everyone just fine. Conceptually, I like this track, but once you know the fastest routes, there's no reason to ever take the others. If this was Mario Kart World, you'd hear people use the excuse that the slower routes need to be there so you could get away from the other players, but Mario Kart 64 only has 8 racers at a time, so there's no such excuse to make. 3 stars. I still like a lot about this track, but the multiple routes are such a flawed implementation. Yoshi Deserts from Super Circuit is one of the game's best tracks. Good thing it only ever came back in Tour, everyone's favorite Mario Kart. Quicksand pits, tons of speed boost, a shortcut ramp you can take over the Oasis. It's not much, but for Game Boy, this is pretty solid. solid. A 4. Time for our first 5-star. Funnily enough, I wouldn't be surprised if people thought that a 5 was way too high for this. Either way, Double Dash's Yoshi's Circuit is without a doubt my favorite circuit track. Who would have thought that a literal silhouette of Yoshi would make for a good track layout? Well, Nintendo apparently. Good turns, piranhas to dodge, shortcuts, one of which was removed and never returned in any game that brought this track back for some reason, but still, and especially just taking the original into consideration, I love this track. From a track that I love to a track I despise, DS's Yoshi Falls kinda sucks. It's just a really boring layout, with the most interesting thing about it being that the items travel down the water. That's it. I already made a joke about Wisconsin or some shit before because of this track, so what else do I say? 1 star. Last but certainly not least is Yoshi's Island from 8 Deluxe. Pretty obviously designed with Tour in mind first and foremost, but it appeared in the Booster Course Pass a few weeks before it showed up in Tour. I guess technically making this a Mario Kart 8 track. Either way, this is a great course. You got unique enemies from Yoshi's Island, it takes you through water, through the sky, and I've always loved this question cloud that made a secret pathway appear when you hit it. The theming is on point, and having a good layout on top of that also helps of course. 5 out of 5. Yoshi's final average came out to a 3.6, giving him the highest score so far. Yoshi. That was until Koopa showed up. Koopa has had 4 tracks throughout the series, with maybe a debatable 5th that we'll talk about briefly. His first 2 showings weren't great, those being Koopa Beach 1 and 2 from Super Nintendo. Trying to give some of the same lenience I gave to Mario, because I mean if a character has any track from Super, that's obviously going to hinder their score, and that's not super fair. So cutting a bit of slack, I gave Beach 1 a 3 and Beach 2 a, well, 2. Both are basically just circle layouts. Beach 1 gives you a bit more room to breathe, however, and Beach 2 has a bunch of randomly placed deep water pits that kind of make the track feel a bit haphazardly thrown together. Koopa's other 2 tracks are bangers though. Koopa Troopa Beach from 64 might be my favorite track from that game actually. I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion or not, but really. We got branching paths, rising tides that alter routing, little crabs to dodge, tons of jumps, cool shortcuts, particularly this one where you cut through the mountain, and also a catchy as hell song. Especially for a Mushroom Cup track, this is really good. 5 out of 5. Then there's Koopa Cape from Wii, also very good, at least a version in Wii. Truthfully, I think that track only got worse in each subsequent game it was brought back. But again, I'm only trying to judge these on their initial appearances. And the initial version in Wii is great. Racing down the water current keeps up the speed and it's tons of fun. Another 5. Okay, so this was the part where I was supposed to talk about the 5th track, but I didn't script it, so this is completely unscripted. So basically in Mario Kart World, there's a map that's called Koopa Troopa Beach, and it's supposedly supposed to be the Koopa Beach from Super Nintendo. But the thing about that is that, first of all, it's not numbered. Like on Super Nintendo, it was Koopa Beach 1 and Koopa Beach 2, and in Mario Kart World, it's just Koopa Troopa Beach. And that's the second thing. It technically has another name. Because again, in Super Nintendo, it's just called Koopa Beach, and then in World, it's called Koopa Troopa Beach. I didn't know whether or not this like really counts as a retro track, but other people seem to think it counts as a retro track, so I'm just going to count it as a retro track, and it's not going to count as the 5th track. I'm just going to say Koopa has 4 tracks. Koopa may only have 4 tracks, but this puts him at a respectable 3.75 when averaging everything out. He's got some bangers for sure. Alright, is it time? Okay, let's talk about Bowser. Earlier I said there was a character with even more tracks than Mario at a whopping 15, and that character is Bowser. He's had a brand new castle map in every single mainline entry to date, and most of which have been incredibly good. Being represented in each game means he'll unfortunately have his score be held back by his 2D offerings, which starts us off with Bowser Castle 1 from Super Nintendo. Probably his weakest. Not a particularly interesting track. Just the basic U-shape layout that you see a lot on SNES with no cuts or anything. Castles 2 and 3 are a bit more interesting, although Castle 2 in particular seems to get a lot of shit online. The main 2 criticisms I hear are firstly, this dead end. I've talked about this before in my worst items video, but Super Mario Kart is the only game in the series that has item probabilities that are determined by the track itself. For instance, you can't roll a feather on every track, but you know what track you can roll a feather? Bowser Castle 2. This is a very signposted opportunity to use a feather to cut a bit of the track. You can maybe still say it's bad design because it's a beginner's trap, although anyone who's played Super Mario Kart knows that game makes the bizarre decision to always dedicate half of the screen to an overview of the track. I mean, you can press X to toggle a rear view, but by default, half of your screen will be this. So first time seeing this layout before even starting the race. I'd argue that one of the first things that any player is going to notice is that dead end. Dead center of the map, so it's hard to miss. The second big critique is this route right here. Why would anyone choose to take 2 turns instead of just turning once? Am I right, fellas? Well, because, hey, can we get a zoom in? Because that. That right there. The way every track in this game is designed is that they'll have a cluster of items at the start of the race, and then usually nothing else for the remainder. In other words, on most tracks, it's impossible to get more than one item per lap, and I shouldn't have to tell you that items are a key factor when it comes to winning races in Mario Kart. So if items are as rare as they are in Super, and you can take an opportunity to get even just one more, it's generally worth taking that opportunity. That being said, I'm not trying to glaze Castle 2 or anything, because I'm still going to give it a 3. My main problem is that these hallways are just way too cramped. You're basically going to be bumping into tons of walls start to finish given the controls of the first game. You know what track has roads even more cramped than Castle 2? Castle 3, which for some reason gets way more praise than Castle 2. I do love how Castle 3 was remade for Tour in Mario Kart 8. Really good remake. Honestly, just sizing up some of these super tracks is all you need to do to actually salvage them. But in its original iteration, I actually think that Castle 3 is even more irritating to race on than Castle 2 is. Especially this literal wall of flops, like seriously f*** off. I'm still giving it a 3 out of 5 as well because I think Bowser's Castle 3 has a more interesting layout, but I really don't think that one is a significant improvement over the other. Both are kind of just your basic, overly cramped Super Nintendo circuits. After that SNES mid, we got a really solid Bowser's Castle on N64. His biggest track to date, this iteration takes you through a lot. The courtyard with the fire hazard, velvet carpet hallways of thwomps, rickety bridges over lava, and it's capped off of ramps and jumping fireballs. Also, this is the only track of a canonical prisoner? What did this thwomp do? Full 5-star for this track. Back to 2D mid, Bowser Castle 1 from GBA. Also get ready for this because Super Circuit is so psycho they made 4 Bowser Castle maps just for this one game. 7 if you want to count the Super Nintendo stuff. The first one really doesn't have that much to talk about. A hallway of ramps and some thwomps are about the most interesting features here. 2 out of 5. I think a lot of us know Castle 2 because it was brought back in DS. And personally, I really like this one. The stretch of chain floor with all those ramps and fireballs is both thematically and functionally cool. Speed panels you find all throughout the track, honestly I'm giving this a 4. Castle 3 we all know from Wii, and I think it's fine. The layout itself doesn't have as much going on as Castle 2, but I still like this one enough. I do like the blue tiling in the original. Helps it stand out. No idea why they went with this homogenized gray when remaking it for Wii. 3 out of 5. The last Bowser map from Super Circuit, Castle 4, it basically combines everything that worked in the previous 3 all into one pretty big layout for Super Circuit standards. Chain floor hallways of ramps, fireballs, swamps, Mecha Koopas, and even a cool jump that crosses over a previous segment. This is our first and probably only 5-star 2D layouts of the video. Also, shout out to the version of it in Tour. They did a great job remaking it there. Complete with this segment where you dodge giant pinballs for some reason. Wish we would have got this in the Booster Course Pass instead of, I don't know, Mario Circuit 3 for the 5th time. On to GameCube. No surprises here. Another great iteration of Bowser's Castle. I don't know if I'm giving this a 5 because the layout is really that good, or I just like how Double Dash controls, but I really like the turns on this one. Besides, level design should always be an extension of the controls. Sky High Sundae is actually pretty solid in World, not because the track was changed all too much, but because it's a better complement to World's engine than it is 8's. That being the case, I don't feel all too guilty giving GameCube's Castle a 5. Thematically, I think it could be a bit stronger, which is why I almost gave this a 4. But again, I really like the overall layout, this ballsy cut where you gotta fall off at an angle. Also, it ends with a giant Bowser statue that pivots left to right to shoot colossal fireballs at you. That's gotta count for something. You know, I might give the tracks in DS a hard time, but if nothing else, it has a phenomenal Bowser's Castle. Maybe even my favorite. I really think this one is that good. A lot of moving pieces to this one. Literally. You have the expected thwomps and lava, of course. However, you also got a few branching paths, including this one on the rotating dial turn. There's a bit where you have to balance on that giant rolling pin, get bumped by anything, and have to take the long way, finally ending with the horizontally moving platforms. Another 5. I was deciding between a 4 and a 5 for Wii, and while I want to give credit where credit is due for how awesome this one is thematically, especially this trippy hallway, you look at that minimap and yeah, 2 decent chunks of this track are just straight aheads. It's still a great map, but closer to a 4 I'd say. Although again, thematically there's some sick stuff here. Time for our only non-castle map, Mario Kart 7's Neo Bowser City. A circuit track, but one of the better ones if you ask me. It's in Mario Kart 8, so I think we've all played this one, and it's basically identical in both games. I've always really liked that glider cut off to the side utilizing that wind funnel. I really wish more tracks had stuff like this. 4 out of 5. As for 7's Bowser Castle, is it weird I think this is one of the weaker iterations? Let me make it clear that I do like it. It's a 4 out of 5, but for all this stuff going on, hell, you even go underwater tracker with lava geysers at one point. I don't think the layout is all too interesting. I don't know, I really like a lot of 7's track offerings, but its Bowser's Castle never particularly stood out to me. Not the case with 8, however, although funnily enough, I initially didn't think much of this one either, but the more I raced on it, the more I realized, you know what? Yeah, this is a pretty solid layout. It's paced incredibly well with tons of jumps and sharp turns. I do wish it was a tad longer, but if that's my biggest complaint, you know this one is good. Full 5. Last but not least, we have the most recent Bowser's Castle in our most recent game, Mario Kart World. If you've seen my World track ranking, then you already know I with this one. It's no secret that I'm fairly critical of World in its list of courses, but damn, this is such a damn good Bowser's Castle. That whole segment where you're speeding for that wind funnel and there's like giant meteors of hit markers, what a badass track. Easy 5. Blatantly one of World's best tracks. So that was Bowser and his 15 tracks. Averaging everything out puts him at a 3.93 repeating out of 5. Might seem low given all the bangers he has to his name, although keep in mind that 7 of his 15 tracks, nearly half mind you, are from the 2D titles. So coming off his score this high despite that is pretty commendable. Of course this makes him the highest ranked of all the characters currently, but can anyone top him? I didn't mean it like that. Toad has had 4 tracks, his first being Toad's Turnpike from 64. I don't know what exactly is so Toad about this track, but his name is in the title, so we're talking about it. Hold on, wait. There's a singular billboard with his insignia on it, so clearly a Toad track. The track itself, it's alright. It's just your basic traffic map. The first ever, actually, but still a basic traffic map all the same. 3-star. Toad's Factory from Wii is probably the guy's crowning achievement. For a Mushroom Cup track, there's a lot of hazards and unique touches that help make this course stand out. I've always been a huge fan of the conveyor belt turns that let you take them faster. Making a track simple enough for Mushroom Cup, yet still this exciting is no small feat, so serious respect here. 5-star. Toad's Circuit from 3DS is, well, definitely a circuit map. I'm gonna cut out some slack for being the game's opening track, and as far as those are concerned, Toad's Circuit has more to it than some of the other openers we've looked at in this very video, in fact, but it's still an opening circuit track. Honestly, I think the mere inclusion of a glider ramp is saving this from being a 2, but again, cutting some slack, I'll give it a 3. Toad's last track is Harbor from 8, and I like this one. Very San Fran inspired. The trolleys are cute, I like that ramp off the boats, how you can drive on top of the canopies in the little market square, and it's got some good mood vibes going on. 4-star. Toad's average is a 3.75 out of 5, which gives him one of the higher averages, but he ain't touching that Bowser score. Alright, bring in the monkey. Donkey Kong has had 6 tracks of his own, almost all of which being either jungle or mountain themed. The first was in 64, DK's Jungle Parkway. The 2 bits that always stood out to me was that first jump where there's like a bit of a risk-reward element to it, since the more angled you take the jump, the more of the track that you'll cut, but take it too sharp and you won't make the jump at all. It's cool. Then this ending bridge is so narrow, it makes it a hot spot for item usage. The rest of the track isn't anything special. A completely flat winding path mostly. Overall, I still like this one and think it deserves a 4. DK Mountain from GameCube. Everyone likes this one. You start off by blasting out of a giant barrel cannon, then decline a bumpy volcano of tons of jumps, making your way back to the jungle, all the while dealing with sharp U-turns in narrow routing. In subsequent remakes, I think they widened out the track a little too much, making what used to be a decently tricky track way too easy. I mean, really, look at this side by side of how it appeared in the Booster Course Pass. But even there, the track was still good, and since we're just scoring the original, this has to be a 5. DK Pass is something I scored fairly high when ranking all the tracks in World. Not that they even changed it that much. I think World's engine just complements this track better than DS's. That being the case, I can't score the original that high. The course isn't awful or anything, there's just nothing to it. 2-star. Come on, everyone knows that racing down a mountain is cooler than racing up it. Case in point, DK Summit from Wii, also known as DK Snowcross if you're European. From a glance, it perhaps appears as if there is less going on here than in DK Pass, although I think the key difference here is the pacing. All the boosters, the ramps, the starting barrel cannon, there's more going on a moment-to-moment basis. For whatever reason, downhill maps seem to always work better than uphill maps in Mario Kart. Another 5. DK Jungle from 3DS is very clearly modeled after the Return series, and it gives this track a distinct vibe. This is another track that also appeared in it and didn't change all too much. For the better, I'd say, because I'd argue there really isn't much you could do to improve it. It's well paced, thematically it's interesting, you go through a temple at one point, moving obstacles, glider shortcuts, yet another 5. Last is DK Spaceport, a DK map that is not based around a jungle or a mountain, but instead the arcade original. Again, not trying to repeat verbatim what I said in my world ranking, but thematically, this track is great. And as a tutorial, I think this track does a phenomenal job introducing the rail grinding and rail switching in a very intuitive way. Unfortunately, the actual layout is too reliant on item RNG, I find, since there isn't much to perfect on the track itself. It's just straight hallways, so there's definitely no secret cuts or anything. May seem harsh, but as great as the theming is, I think the actual layout is a 2. That's all 6 of DK's tracks, making his overall overall average a 3.83 out of 5. Another relatively high score, just narrowly being beaten out by Bowser. I think it's fair though. Bowser had to slog through a bunch of 2D tracks to maintain that score, whereas the 2 tracks I ranked low for DK, Spaceport and DS's version of DK Pass, really have no excuse. Again, neither are bad, but they're not living up to what was possible on their respective platform. Time for the other powerhouse of the franchise, Wario. Similar to DK, Wario has also had 6 tracks of his own, plus a debatable 7th that we'll cover when we get to it, although I won't actually be counting it, and I promise this time that I remembered the scripted. Wario's first track was Stadium from 64. As fantastic of a track this was in World, its original 64 iteration is rough. There's just nothing going on. And mind you, you could not trick off jumps until Wii, so all these whoops don't serve much of a purpose. This is just a track that drags on for 5 minutes and offers no unique ideas of its own. It's a 1. I don't care what anyone says, I love Wario Coliseum, and I think that it's criminal that it did not show up in 8, where it would have been perfectly complemented by anti-grav. Probably would have been good in World as well. I can see this layout lending itself well to some cool rail grinding or wall riding segments. To this day, this is still the only track in this series that has a default of 2 laps to compensate for a more extensive runtime. Fun track. Even in Double Dash, I think it complements its engine well since it's built around its fun yet tricky turns. 5-star. Wario Stadium DS. Even though we are still 1 title short of the trick system, there's way more going on here than its 64 sibling with the same name. Actual moving obstacles, speed boost, it doesn't take 10 years to complete. 4 out of 5. Goldmine from Wii. Wii fans probably going to hate me, but I was deciding between a 3 and a 4 and landed on a 3. Firstly, I do prefer this track in 8. I think it's one of the better uses of anti-grav, with the whole idea of trying to slide by the minecart to get a speed boost. Otherwise, if you take away the theming, this is more or less a circuit track in disguise. Just a single route of a uniform width start to finish, sans 1 alternate route at the very end. Not a bad track, but I think the theming is doing most of the heavy lifting here. Wario Shipyard is awesome. Not so much the version in World, although even I have to admit that I think I gave it a little more flack than it probably deserved. Nonetheless, the original in 7 is really fun. Hopping in and out of the water is cool, and the bubble jet streams make for fun hazards and design supplements. 4 out of 5. Lastly is Mound Wario, which is almost like a proto Mario Kart World intermission. Although I gotta say, if the intermissions in World were as good as Mount Wario, I would like that game way more. This is a 3 checkpoint deal, and the design is so tight with every lap feeling distinctive from the last. Also, it looks and sounds great. Full 5 out of 5. The last track I was saying is maybe debatably a Wario track, although I won't be counting it, is Ninja Hideaway. A lot of you are probably turning your heads at that one, but if you look closely, there's a lot of Wario iconography across the map. Garlic logos, you got Wario's iconic crooked mustache plastered on top of some of the buildings. Again, I won't be counting it, but if someone else counted this as a Wario course, I could see the argument. Wario's final average is 3.66 out of 5. High, but not DK or Bowser high. Credit where credit is due. Wario is another character with a respectable lineup. Our final 2 characters have exactly 3 tracks each, starting with Daisy. Her first map was Daisy Cruiser, which was a fantastic track, at least when it was first introduced. I've explained in my Booster Course Wave 5 video why the remakes of this track aren't as solid as the original, but maybe I did a bad job because someone thought the biggest reason I preferred the original is because it's harder to dodge stuff? How can that be the biggest reason when that's something I never said about Daisy Cruiser? In the event I just articulated it horribly last time, here's a play-by-play of the layout. Ending the lap, they removed the life buoys you could use to knock over opponent racers behind you, so that's a bummer. But then on the top deck in the original, you had to take this route to the right, swing around the pool from the left, then go back to the right to decline a spiral staircase. A boat is obviously very vertically oriented, so without stuff like this would be a track consisting of mostly driving straight. Which brings us to the remakes. You can straight up ignore the routes on the right because there's now one on the left, and you can drive through the water now, which means you basically don't have to turn for half of the track now. That's what the original did better. All of this to say, I think this deserves a 5, and if that seems high to you and you've only played the newer versions, then I'd recommend trying it out in Double Dash. Next, she had Daisy Circuit from Wii, and for me, this is up there as one of the best circuit tracks. Unlike Daisy Cruiser, I think that Daisy Circuit has remained solid in all of its iterations. The design is decently compact for a circuit track, which I think is why the layout feels so distinct from, say, a Mario circuit. 4-star. Her final track is unfortunately her weakest, and that track is Daisy Hills from 7. Maybe this track gets a little too much flack, but in all fairness, it is a little lame. Understandably, it is a Mushroom Cup track, but things are spaced out way too far apart, resulting in a slow-paced map. Daisy's average is a 3.66 out of 5, kind of putting her sort of in the middle of all the characters. All 3 of her tracks are completely different, so she has yet to really establish a theme in the series. Our final racer is Shy Guy. Shy Guy is another character that hasn't ever really established what it means to be a Shy Guy track, as you're about to see. His first course was Shy Guy Beach from Super Circuit, which is pretty bad beach map, to be honest. GBA tracks had twice as much space to work with than the Super Nintendo tile maps had, so when your map is a square, I mean, look at this, is literal square, there's not as much of an excuse, especially when you compare it to some other tracks in Super Circuit. I enjoy it more here than I do in Wii, if for no other reason than the Wii sized things up a little too much, but I can't give this anything higher than a 2. Shy Guy Bazaar kicks ass. Contender for one of the best Mushroom Cup tracks. Multiple routes, moving hazards, even during a glider segment, which is weirdly rare for Mario Kart. Good turns and awesome theming. I love how the market square practically glows with all those warm lights contrasting the colder night colors. No other track looks like Shy Guy Bazaar. 5 out of 5. His last track is Shy Guy Falls, which, at least in terms of theming, is one of the best uses of the game's anti-grav. Racing up a waterfall and then down another? That's sick. You have a bunch of boost panels riding down the falls you're trying to hit on the way up, and on the way down, it turns into a glider segment where you can take this upper cave route. My biggest critique is this stretch to the end that feels kind of haphazardly stitched together, like this shortcut right here. The camera angle is so bad, you can't even see where you're going, making this kind of a blind cut. Also, as cool as that upper cave is, the glider doesn't let you take it at a good angle, making it clunky to exit. I know I'm being harsh here though. Shy Guy Falls is a great track that is a few small edits away from being a perfect one. 4 out of 5. This puts our shy little man at a 3.66 out of 5. Same as Daisy, and likewise in the middle of the pack. But that's everyone. So how did the math shake out? To probably no surprise, yeah, Bowser is the character with the best tracks. He's also been the most represented character in terms of track quantity, even outclassing Mario. His score is followed by DK, who's followed by Toad, who's followed by Koopa, who's followed by Wario. You know, that's actually crazy Koopa scored higher than Wario. Stadium from 64 really weighing this guy down. He's followed by Shy Guy, who's followed by Daisy, followed by Yoshi, then Luigi, then Peach, and at the very bottom, the character of the overall worst tracks throughout the series is Mario. Again, I find it hilarious that Mario has the worst tracks in his own game. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a good one.